The champagne was already poured, and the light in the living room was thick with the sickening sweetness of premature victory. My Aunt Linda was practically vibrating with glee, waving the heavy deposit check in the light of flag of conquest, while Uncle Jerry slapped my cousins on the back, congratulating them on the easiest payday of their lives. They had changed the locks, listed Grandpa George's Victorian estate behind my back, and he found a cash buyer willing to close in 2 weeks. To them, it was just the invisible grandson, the obstacle they had successfully shoved aside to get to the money. But the celebration died instantly when the phone on the kitchen counter rang. It wasn't the congratulatory call they were expecting from the real estate agent, it was a lawyer from the title company. And he wasn't calling to schedule the closing. He watched from the shadows of the hallway, silent as a ghost, as the color drained from Jerry's face. The room went so quiet he could hear the lawyer's tinny voice through the receiver delivering the words that would ruin them. You've signed a contract to sell a property you don't own. In their blind greed, they hadn't bothered to check the deed. They didn't know Grandpa had moved the house into an irrevocable trust years ago, naming me as the sole beneficiary and the trustee. They had taken a massive deposit for a house that wasn't theirs to sell, committing felony fraud in the process. The buyer wasn't just walking away. They were suing for damages, legal fees, and the immediate return of their money my family simply didn't have. They looked up at me in horror, realizing too late that the outcast held all the cards, but to understand how their greed became their absolute undoing, we have to go back to the moment Grandpa George first got sick. The dust motes dancing in the shafts of morning sunlight were the only things moving quickly in the old house. Everything else operated on Grandpa George's time, slow, deliberate, and quiet. He stood at the kitchen island, the worn butcher block smooth under my fingertips, waiting for the kettle to whistle. It was a sound that had punctuated every morning of my life for as long as he could remember, a signal that the day had truly begun. My childhood wasn't marked by family vacations or parents cheering from the sidelines of soccer games. Instead, it was a blur of indifference, a series of nannies and the empty promises left by a mother and the father who were always too busy chasing the next social high or business merger. They were distant satellites orbiting a planet they had no more interest in landing on. It was Grandpa George who had been the gravity keeping me grounded. He was the one who taught me to tie my shoelaces, who sat up with me when he had fevers, and who attended every graduation with a beaming smile that made up for the empty seats beside him. The kettle screamed, snapping me back to the present. He poured the hot water over the tea bag Earl Grey, 2 sugars, a splash of milk just the way he liked it. Balancing the cup on a saucer, he made my way to the sunroom. Grandpa was sitting in his leather armchair, the material cracked and softened by decades of use. He was staring out at the garden, his eyes milky with age but still sharp with intelligence. A heavy woolen blanket was draped over his legs, hiding the frailty that had taken hold over the last few years. "Morning, kid," he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves rustling together. He didn't turn his head, but his hand lifted slightly from the armrest in greeting. "Morning, Grandpa," he sighed, setting the tea down on the side table. "It's a good day out, sir. The hydrangeas are blooming." He chuckled, a whizzing sound that rattled in his chest. "Are they now? Your grandmother loved those bushes. I suppose they're showing off for her." He sat on the ottoman near his feet, adjusting the blanket to ensure he was warm. This was my life now. While my friends were out building careers in the city or traveling the world, he had moved back into the sprawling estate to become his primary caretaker. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a repayment, a debt that couldn't be quantified in currency. He had saved me from loneliness as a child. The least he could do was save him from it now. "Drink your tea while it's hot," he urged gently. He took a sip, his hand trembling slightly. "You're a good lad. You don't say it enough." "You say plenty," he replied, smiling. The peace of the morning was shattered by the crunch of gravel on the driveway. The sound was distinct, aggressive tires moving too fast for the winding lane. My stomach tightened. He knew the sound. "Is that today?" Grandpa asked, his expression shifting from contentment to a weary resignation. "I'm afraid so," he muttered, standing up and moving to the window. A sleek black Mercedes parked haphazardly near the rose garden, followed closely by a red convertible. My mother, Evelyn, stepped out of the black car, adjusting her oversized sunglasses and moving down a dress that cast more than my car. From the red convertible emerged Aunt Sarah and Aunt Petrus, looking like clones of my mother, just slightly different variations of artificial use and the palpable greed. "The vultures have landed," I whispered to myself, though Grandpa heard me. "Be nice," he chided gently, though there was no more heat in his words. "They're still family. They're strangers with the same last name," I corrected him. He went to the front door to intercept them before they could barge in. He wanted to maintain the sanctuary of the house for as long as possible. As he opened the heavy oak door, the scent of expensive perfume hit me instantly, overpowering the smell of old wood and the floor wax. Sir Hayes, the hermit, Aunt Sarah announced, her voice shrill and piercing. She brushed past me without a hug, her eyes immediately scanning the hallway as if appraising the furniture. Hello, Sarah, I sighed stiffly. Grandpa is resting in the sunroom. My mother stepped in front of me, pulling her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. You look tired, darling. Are you sure you're managing? We really should discuss the nursing home again. It's just too much work for one person. I held my ground, crossing my arms. He's happy here, mother, and I'm fine. We've been all for this. It's not about him being happy, Aunt Pickers chimed in, stepping into the foyer and tapping her heels on the hardwood. It's about practicality. This house is enormous. The upkeep alone must be draining the accounts. Said it was. It took less than 30 seconds. They didn't care about his health or my fatigue. They cared about the inheritance. To them, Grandpa George wasn't a patriarch or a beloved father. He was a walking ATM, an obstacle standing between them and the liquidation Sally. The accounts are fine, I sighed, my voice dropping inactive. Everything is managed perfectly. My mother sighed, a theatrical puff of fire. Well, we're here now. We need to talk to him about the summer property. Sarah found a buyer who is offering a ridiculous amount, and we're releasing that should sign off on it while the market is hot. I felt a surge of heat rise up my neck. He loves that lake house. He built the deck with his own hands. He hasn't been set in 5 years. Petrus snapped. His settings are rotting. It's a waste of capital. He looked at the three of my biological family. They were dressed in designer labels, holding purses worth thousands. Yet they looked at his house and the grandpa's assets with the starving desperation of wolves. They had never come to visit when he had pneumonia last winter. They hadn't called on his birthday, sending generic gift baskets arranged by their assistants instead. But the moment there was a rumor of a buyer, or a fluctuation in property value, they descended in mass. He's having his tea, he sighed firmly, blocking the hallway. You can go in, but if you mention selling the lake house within the first 10 minutes, I'm kicking you all out. You can't kick us out, Sarah scoffed. This is our father's house. And I am his power of attorney and his caretaker. I shut back, my patience evaporating. I decide who disturbs his peace. My mother looked shocked, her mouth opening slightly. She wasn't used to me fighting back. For years, he had been the quiet child in the corner, the one they ignored. But he wasn't the child anymore. He was the keeper of the gate. Fine, mother sighed, waving her hand dismissively. We'll just say hello. For now, he stepped aside, letting them pass. As they walked toward the sunroom, their heels clacking loudly, he watched their backs. Isalallahu alaihi wasallam, the way they whispered to each other, pointing at a painting on the wall, likely guessing its accent value. He took a deep breath and he followed them. He wouldn't leave Grandpa alone with them, not for a second. They might see him as a banford waiting to be cracked. But Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the man who had dried my tears and he taught me what love actually looked like. And as long as there was breath in my body, he would make sure he knew the difference between the love that gives and the greed that takes. The signs were subtle at first, masked by faint consent and the over-sweetened Sunday visits, but Grandpa Jordan had the eyes of a hawk and the memory of an elephant, while my mother and her sisters, and Linda and Aunt Sarah, bickered in the kitchen over who had done more for him that week. George would sit in his leather recliner, feigning sleep but listening to every word. He heard them appraising the silverware, estimating the value of the antique grandfather clock, and whispering about how the market value if the house had skyrocketed. They weren't mourning his decline. They were calculating their inheritance. It was 3 years before he actually passed, on a humid Tuesday afternoon, that he decided to change the narrative. He remembered the day vividly because the air in the house felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that usually preceded a storm. Grandpa had called me specifically, asking me to come over not for chores or to watch the game, but for business. When he arrived, the house was unusually quiet. The ants weren't said. There was no more clatter of dishes or performative vacuuming, just the ticking of the doomed grandfather clock in the hallway. He found him in his study, a room that smelled of wallpaper, pipe tobacco, and lemon polish. He wasn't alone. Sitting opposite him at the mahogany desk was Mr. Sterling, his attorney of 40 years. Sterling was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, wearing a suit that had probably been in style since the Reagan administration. Close the door, kid, Grandpa sighed, his voice raspy but commanding. He pointed to the empty chair next to Sterling. Sit, he sat, looking between the two of them. Is everything okay, Grandpa? Are you sick? I'm old, not dead, George snapped, though his eyes softened when they met mine. But I'm not blind either. You see what's happening out, sir? Your mother and your aunts, they've already spent the money in their heads. They look at this house and they do and see the Christmas mornings or the years he spent paying the mortgage. They see a paved. They see a quiz salad to the highest bidder so they can buy condos in Florida or pay off their credit cards. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. The tremors in his fingers were the only betrayal of his age. His gaze was iron. "You won't have it," he stated flatly. "You won't have my legacy picked apart by vultures before I am even in the ground." "Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, opening a thick leather folder. He slid a stack of documents across the desk toward me. The paper looked dense, intimidating, and the official. "Your grandfather has directed me to draft a specific legal instrument," Sterling sighed, his voice dry and professional. "This is an irrevocable living trust." He looked down at the paperwork, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. "A trust? What does that mean?" "It means," Grandpa interrupted, "that as of this afternoon, I no more longer own this house. Neither do you own my savings accounts or the portfolio." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Grandpa, did you sell it? Where are you going to live?" Aware, Mr. Basquin cracked his weathered face. "He didn't sell it to a stranger, kid. He transferred it to the trust." He tapped the paper with a bony finger. "Andy, I'm naming you the sole beneficiary and the successor trustee." He stared at him, unable to process the magnitude of what he was saying. "Me, Buck. What about Mom? What about Linda and Sarah? They get the life insurance?" George sighed with a dismissive wave of his hand. "It's enough to keep them quiet for a bit, but the house, the bulk of the estate, it goes into the trust. And because it's in a trust, it doesn't belong to me when I die. That means it doesn't go through probate." Mr. Sterling took over, explaining the mechanics of the stroke of genius. "Probate is a public court process, son. It takes months, sometimes years. It's expensive, and it invites contests from family members who feel entitled to a share. By moving the deed of the house and these assets into the trust now, your grandfather ensures that the moment he passes, control transfers instantly to you. The house will never technically be part of his estate to be divided. It bypasses the courts entirely. Your aunts cannot touch it. They cannot force a sally. They cannot sue the estate for it, because the estate doesn't own it. The trust does. And you control the trust." The weight of the responsibility settled onto my shoulders. I looked at Grandpa George, really looked at him. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the fear behind the bravado, not fear of death, but fear of erasure. He was terrified that everything he had built, the physical manifestation of his life's work, would be liquidated and forgotten within a month of his funeral. He chose me not just because he loved me, but because he knew he was the only one who respected the history of the wars around US. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "This is going to start a war." "The war is already started," Georgie sighed softly. "They just don't know they've lost yet. I am choosing you because you're the only one who comes over here to listen to my stories, not to check my pulse. You're the only one who fixes the fence because it needs fixing, not because you're expecting a check." He pushed a heavy fountain pen toward me. "This is my backup plan, my safety net. I need to know that when I close my eyes for the last time, the sharks won't be feeding on my bones. I need you to protect it." He picked up the pen. The room felt incredibly still, the ticking clock sounding like a countdown. He wasn't just signing a legal document, he was signing a conspiracy. He was agreeing to hold a secret that would eventually detonate the family dynamic, but would preserve the honor of the man sitting across from me. "I won't let you down, Grandpa," he promised. "You know," he sighed, watching me sign my name on the trustee line. "That's why we're doing this." Mr. Sterling notarized the signatures with a heavy thump of his stamp, sealing the deed transfer. In that moment, the house technically ceased to be George's property in the eyes of the law, yet he remained the master of his domain. He had outmaneuvered them all without leaving his chair. "One more thing," Grandpa sighed as Sterling packed away the files that now held the title to his life. "Not our gift is to your mother or your aunts. As far as they know, nothing has changed. Let them bring their casseroles and their fake smiles. Let them measure the curtains. Let them sing Days Won." He leaned back, looking younger, lighter, as if a great physical burden had been lifted from his chest. "When the time comes," he winked, "Mr. Sterling will read the will, and they'll find out the house is already gone. I'd give anything to see their faces, but I suppose I'll have to watch from upstairs." We shook hands, a solemn pact between generations. I walked out of that study with the knowledge that I was walking on my own floorboards, though no one else knew it yet. It was a secret we kept for 3 years, right up until the end. Grandpa Jordan had played his hand perfectly, securing his legacy through a loop of ink and a brilliant legal maneuver, leaving me the guardian of his fortress and the keeper of his final, triumphant laugh. The dirt on Grandpa George's grave hadn't even settled before the wolves shut their sheep as clothing. He was still processing the image of the casket lowering into the ground, the scent of lilies and the dampers clinging to my coat. When the text messages stopped coming. No more "Are you okay?" No more "Let's have dinner together." To remember him. Just a deafening, calculated radio silence. He had driven home from the cemetery with a hollow ache in my chest, thinking the hardest part was over. He was wrong. The grief was heavy, yes, but it was the betrayal waiting for me across town that would bring me to my knees. He decided to go over to Grandpa's house the next morning. He needed to water his ferns, the ones he fussed over like children, and he maybe just sit in his armchair for a while to feel close to him. He had given me a key 5 years ago, pressing the brass into my palm with a wink, telling me that his door was always open to me, that this place was as much mine as it was his. In our quiet moments, over tea and chess, he had been clear about his intentions. He had told me, time and time again, that the house would be mine. He wanted to secure my future. He wasn't naive enough to think it would be simple, but he never expected a war. As he pulled into the long, gravel driveway, the first thing he noticed was the unfamiliar van parked near the grass. It was white, emblazoned with the logo Eva 24 a locksmith service. My stomach turned over, a cold knot of dread tightening instantly. Why was a locksmith here? He parked my car and he walked up the porch steps, the wood creaking familiarly under my boots. He reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of Grandpa's key. He slid it into the lock, expecting the smooth, heavy turn of the timbre that he had felt 1,000 times before. Instead, the key hit a wall. It wouldn't go in more than halfway. He frowned, jiggling it, thinking maybe he was just clumsy with grief, but it refused to budge. The mechanism was shiny, new, and completely foreign. What on earth? I whispered to myself. Before he could knock, the door was yanked open from the inside. Standing there, blocking the entryway with an air of imperious authority, was my mother. She wasn't wearing black anymore. She was dressed in casual clothes, a dust rag in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Behind her, in the foyer that usually smelled of Grandpa's pipe tobacco and the old books, the air was thick with the scent of lemon polish and the aggression. "Mom," I stammered, holding up my useless key. "What's going on? My key doesn't work." She looked at me not with sympathy, but with the annoyance one might reserve for a door-to-door solicitor. Her eyes flicked the key in my hand and she let out a sharp, dismissive sigh. "Put that away," she sighed, her voice clipped. "It's obsolete. We had the locks changed this morning. Security reasons. You can't be too careful when a house sits empty." "Empty?" I stepped forward, trying to see past her. "I'm here. I'm checking on things." "Andy, why didn't you tell me? I've been calling you all morning." "We've been busy," she snapped, crossing her arms. "Your aunts and have taken control of the estate. Someone has to be the adult here. We can't just leave George's as vulnerable." From the living room, Aunt Carol emerged, holding one of Grandpa's antique porcelain vases. She turned it over in her hands, inspecting the maker's mark on the bottom, her eyes gleaming with an aggress that made my skin crawl. And Petrus was right behind her, already tagging the heavy oak furniture with bright neon sticky notice. They looked like vultures picking at a carcass before my heart had even stopped beating. "That's Grandpa's," he said, my voice rising. "Put that down. The wall hasn't even been read yet. You can't just come in here and start claiming things." My mother stepped out onto the porch, effectively forcing me down a step. "The wall is a formality," she declared, her face hardening. "We are his daughters. This is family property. We are the rightful heirs, and we are simply securing what belongs to us. We've moved in to make sure everything is properly managed." "Moved in?" The words felt like a physical blow. "You have your own houses. Grandpa told me this house was going to me. He told me explicitly." Aunt Carol laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed from the hallway. "Oh, honey," she called out, not even bothering to look up from the painting she was appraising. "Old men say a lot of things when they're confused. Unless you have a piece of paper in your hand right now, you have nothing." "You know what he wanted?" he shouted, the anger finally overriding the shock. "You didn't even visit him for the last 6 months. He was the one who took him to his appointments. He was the one who mowed the lawn. You only showed up when the health monitor flatlined." My mother's face went cold. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Watch your tone. You are a guest here." And he barely did. "We hired a locksmith because we knew you'd come snooping around, trying to take advantage of the situation. We are protecting this family's legacy from scavengers." The ghastly thing was so potent he almost staggered. He was the scavenger. He looked past her shoulder and sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the locksmith coming down the stairs, packing up his drill. He looked uncomfortable, keeping his eyes on the floor as he squeezed past my mother to get to his fan. They had planned this. They had coordinated this invasion the moment the doctor called time of death. You can lock me out, he sighed, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and sorrow. I have belongings in, sir. My books, my winter coat, the photo albums Grandpa and organized. I'll box up whatever trash we find that belongs to you and leave it on the curb, and Pickers shouted from the kitchen. Right now we need to inventory the silver. This is illegal, he argued, though he felt my confidence wavering against the united front. You can't just seize the property before probate. Possession is 9/10 of the law, my mother sighed smugly. And we are in possession. We have the new keys. We have the alarm code. And you. She pointed a manicured finger at my chest, at a trespassing. Trespassing? This is my home. Not anymore, she hissed. It's ours. And frankly, we don't need you underfoot while we sort through the valuables. Go home. Wait for the lawyer to call you, if he even has a reason to. He tried to push past her, desperate to just get inside, to stop them from touching his things, to preserve the sanctuary Grandpa had built. But my mother was stronger than she looked, and she shoved me back with surprising force. I stumbled down to the bottom step of the porch. Don't make a scene, she warned, her hand resting on the door frame. The neighbors are watching. Have some dignity. Dignity? He choked out, tears finally spilling over. You're looting your dead father's house less than a day after his funeral. You monsters. We are practical, she corrected, her expression turning to stone. Goodbye. She didn't wait for a response. She stepped back inside and slammed the heavy oak door in my face. The sound was final, like a gunshot. He heard the distinct, heavy click of the deadbolt sliding home the new deadbolt that he didn't have a key for. He stood sat on the gravel, the silence of the afternoon rushing by in to fill the void. Through the bay window, he could see the silhouette of Aunt Beatrice moving the curtains aside, peering out to make sure he was leaving. They were inside, warm and triumphant, surrounded by the legacy they felt entitled to strip mine. He was outside, shivering despite the sun, clutching a brass gate open nothing, locked out of the only place where he had truly felt safe. He looked at the locksmith fan pulling away, the driver refusing to make eye contact with me. My mother and the aunts hadn't just changed the locks. They had declared war. They thought that by physically barring me, they had won. They thought that because they held the castle, they held the power. But as he stared at the closed door, the shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Grandpa John had raised me better than to let bullies win, even if those bullies shared my blood. I walked back to my car, wiping the tears from my cheeks. They wanted a fight over the estate. They wanted to talk about rightful ownership. Fine. He tossed the useless key onto the passenger seat and he pulled out my phone. He wasn't going to bang on the door anymore. He was going to find the lawyer, and he was going to bring the whole house down on top of them. It was terrifying to watch how quickly grief could be metabolized into greed. It hadn't even been a full week since the funeral, and the mourning period had evidently expired the moment my family decided the estate was theirs for the taking. He sat on the porch of the guest cutting, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, watching the mine house like a hawk. They moved with a frantic, feverish energy, as if slowing down would allow reality to catch up with them. My Aunt Linda and Uncle Greg didn't bother with a legitimate real estate agent. A realtor would ask questions. A realtor would want to see probate papers, the will, and the documents that were currently locked in my attorney's safe, designating me as the sole beneficiary. No more. They didn't want due diligence. They wanted speed. They called one of those predatory way-by ugly houses operations, the kind that stapled yellow signs to telephone poles and preyed on the desperate. The investor arrived in a flashy, blacked-out sedan that looked out of place in our quiet, gravel driveway neighborhood. He was a man named Mr. Finney, wearing a suit that was too tight and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He walked the perimeter of the property with Uncle Greg, kicking at the foundation and pointing out force that it didn't exist to drive the price down. He could hear them from where he sat, the summer air carrying their voices clearly across the lawn. It's a bit dated, Greg, Finney sighed, gesturing vaguely at a pristine Victorian siding my grandfather had restored by hand. Market is cooling off. You can take it off your hands, but it has to be a cash deal, quick close. No more inspections. That's exactly what we want, Uncle Greg replied, his voice trembling with an eagerness that made my stomach turn. We just want to liquidate, split the assets and move on. You can shoot you a cashier's check for the deposit today, Finney sighed, reaching into his jacket pocket. 10% down, the rest upon closing next week once the title company clears the paperwork. The mention of the title company should have stopped them cold. It should have been the moment they realized their charade was doomed. But they were so blinded by the promise of immediate cash that they didn't hear the warning bells. They assumed that because they were blood relatives, the title was a mere formality, something that would naturally bend to their will. Where do we sign? Aunt Linda asked, stepping out onto the porch, practically vibrating with anticipation. They signed the preliminary contract right there on the hood of Finney's car. It was a fraudulent act, plain and simple. They were pledging to sell property they did not own, accepting money for an asset that had already been legally bequeathed to me. You watched them shake hands, a pact of thieves sealed in the afternoon soon. Finney handed over a thick envelope the deposit. It must have been $20,000 or $30,000, intended to lock them into the deal. To them, it was a lottery win. To me, it was the final nail in their legal coffin. The transformation in their demeanor was instantaneous. The anxiety of the funeral evaporated, replaced by a swagger that bordered on mania. They didn't wait for the closing. They didn't wait for the rest of the money. They looked at the deposit as the first drop of a monsoon, and they decided to start dancing in the rain immediately. The spending spree began less than 24 hours later. He was waking up to the sound of a heavy diesel engine idling in the driveway. He pulled back the curtains to see my cousin, Mike, revving the engine of a brand new, lifted pickup truck. It was cherry red, massive, and he still had the temporary dealer tags in the window. He hopped out, wearing new designer sunglasses, and he high-fived his father. "She's a beast, Dad," Mike shouted, slapping the hood. "Put the down payment on it this morning." Salesman side financing is a breeze with the inheritance coming in. "Kid man," Uncle Greg laughed, coaching a brochure for a luxury Caribbean cruise line. "Your mother and I just booked a royal suite for next month. First class all the way. We deserve this after putting up with the old man's nonsense all these years." He stepped outside, leaning against the railing of the cottage. They spotted me and for a moment, the air grew tense. Usually, they ignored me, treating me like a squatter who would soon be evicted. Today, however, their arrogance made them bold. Aunt Linda strutted over, holding several shopping bags from the high-end boutique district in the city. She stopped at the foot of the cottage stairs, looking up at me with a sneer that was equal parts pay and malice. "You might want to start packing your things in garbage bags, sweetheart," she called out, shaking the shopping bags so the tissue paper rustled. "The house is sold. We've got the contract. The new owner wants possession by the end of the month." "Is that so?" he asked, keeping my voice level, masking the pounding of my heart. "You sold the house?" "Signed and sealed," she gloated, adjusting the strap of a new leather handbag that probably cost more than my first car. "Cash deal. We're already putting the money to good use, as you can see. Real money. For the real family." "Did you check the title, Aunt Linda?" he asked softly. She rolled her eyes, dismissing me with a wave of her manicured hand. "Don't try to use big words with me to stall. We are the next of kin. That's how the law works. We get the house, we sell the house, we get the money. You get nothing. Now, if you rent out of the property by the time the closing funds hit our account next week, I'm having the sheriff drag you out." She turned on her heel and marched back toward the main house, where Uncle Greg and Mike were laughing, examining the leather interior of the new truck. They were popping a bottle of champagne on the front porch, my grandfather's porch. The cork flew off and landed in the flower bed he had tended for 40 years. They poured the sparkling wine into plastic cups, toasting to their cleverness, to their speed, and to their fortune. They were completely oblivious. They had taken money from a shark, spent it on depreciating assets, and signed a legal document committing fraud, all while the true owner watched from 20 yards away. He went back inside the cottage and he picked up my phone. He dialed my attorney's number. "Hello," the lawyer answered. "It's time," he sighed, watching through the window as they laughed, drank on money that wasn't theirs. They tried to sell the house. They took a deposit. They're spending it right now. They signed a contract. The lawyer asked, his voice sharpening. "Yes. And they're spending the investors' money on cats and vacations." There was a pause on the line, followed by a heavy sigh that sounded almost like sympathy for the fools across the yard. "All right, that changes this from a simple probate dispute to criminal fraud and theft by deception. I'll file the injunction immediately and contact the investor. He is not going to be happy when he finds out his contract is void and his deposit is gone." "No more," he whispered, watching Aunt Linda spin around in her new dress. "He's not going to be happy at all." He hung up the phone. Outside, the celebration continued, loud and boisterous. They were feasting on a meal that was poisoned, convinced they were kings and queens. They had no more idea that the ticking sound wasn't the clock waiting for their closing date. It was the countdown to their total ruin. The phone sat on the mahogany desk like a dormant explosive device, silent but heavy with potential. It was Tuesday, mid-morning, the time when the machinery of real estate bureaucracy usually ground its gears the loudest. He had spent the last 48 hours in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of my daily routine while my mind was entirely focused on a closing process happening 3 towns over, a closing that it was and invited to, for a house that was legally mine. My relatives, in their infinite greed and infinite wisdom, had rushed. That was their fatal flaw. They had pushed for a quick escrow, eager to liquidate Grandpa George's legacy before anyone could ask too many questions. They assumed the possession of the keys and the archaic, self-proclaimed status as estate administrators gave them the right to sell. They had forgotten, or perhaps simply chose to ignore, the one entity that does not care about family drama or sub-stories, the title company. When the phone finally rang, the screen displayed the name of my attorney, Mr. Elias Thorne. It didn't pick up immediately. It took a breath, letting the ringtone loop once, steadying my hands. He pressed answer and he put it on speaker. "It's happening," Elias sighed. His voice was devoid of excitement, maintaining the calm, baritone professionalism that cost $400 an hour. It was the voice of justice. "Tell me," he sighed, leaning back in my chair, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me. "The title officer at Fidelity pulled the preliminary report an hour ago," Elias explained. "Just as we expected, the chain of title hit a brick wall regarding their authority. The buyer's lender required a clear title, and when the officer went to verify the deed, they found that George didn't own the house in his personal name at the time of his death. The estate they are trying to probate is effectively empty regarding the real estate." He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "They Shallallahu Alaihi Wasallam the trust. They Shallallahu Alaihi Wasallam the trust," Elias confirmed. "The deed was transferred 5 years ago, recorded perfectly. The current legal owner is the George Harrison Living Trust." And when the title officer looked for the trustee to sign off on the sale, "They didn't find your Aunt Linda's name. They found yours." He closed my eyes, visualizing the chaos that must have erupted in the title office. "So, the sale is dead?" "Ideally, yes. But he took the liberty of ensuring it stays dead," Elias sighed. The title officer called the listing agent in a panic. "The agent called your aunt. He stepped in 5 minutes ago. He just got off the conference call with the lot of them." This was the moment. The confrontation he had paid for, the shielding he needed. "What did you tell them?" He didn't mince words. "He introduced myself as your counsel and the representative of the trust," Elias sighed. "I wish you could have heard the silence, followed immediately by the cacophony. Your Aunt Linda tried to bluster through it. She started shouting about how she was the eldest, how she had the will or what she claims is the will, and how he was interfering with family business. I could hear Linda's voice in my head, shrill and entitled, used bullying her way through life." He let her finish, Elias continued. "And then he explained the law to her. He told her, 'Mrs. Higgins, you are attempting to convey a property that the estate does not own. You signed a listing agreement as an executrix for an asset that sits outside of probate. That is not a clerical error. That is fraud.'" Toward hung in the air between us, heavy and the absolute. "Fraud? It wasn't just a mistake. It was a crime." "Did they try to deny the trust exists?" he asked. "Uncle Bob tried," Elias chuckled dryly. "He claimed Grandpa George was senile, that you must have manipulated him. He reminded him that the trust was notarized, witnessed, and funded 5 years ago, long before George's health declined. He told them that unless they could produce a court order invalidating the trust, which would take years and tens of thousands of dollars, they have their opinion on the matter is legally irrelevant." He stood up and he walked to the window, looking out at the street. The sun seemed brighter. "And the buyers? That was the coup de grâce," Elias sighed, the slightest hint of satisfaction creeping into his tone. He informed the title officer that the contract is void ab initio, invalid from the start. The sellers listed on the contract do not have the title to sell. He demanded they return the buyer's earnest money immediately and cease all marketing of the property. The title officer agreed instantly. "They don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole now. They've already flagged the file. Even if your family tries to take it to another title company, a cloud on the title will follow them. They are checkmated." A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. For weeks, he had felt like the interloper, the thief in the night. Despite having done everything right, they had gaslit me, chewed me out, and they tried to erase my grandfather's final wishes to line their pockets. Now, the harsh light of legal reality had exposed them. "How did they take the news that the contract was dead?" he asked. "Linda was crying," Elias said simply. "Not tears of sorrow for her father, mind you. Tears of rage. He believed she had already spent the money in her head. She threatened to sue you. She threatened to sue me. She threatened to sue the title company." "Empty threats," he murmured. "Completely." He gave them a final warning before he hung up, Elias sighed. He told them that they have 48 hours to vacate the premises and turn over the keys to the trustee or he will file an immediate injunction for trespassing and the conversion of assets. He told them that every day they remain in the house, they are accruing liability for rent and the damages. Thank you, Elias, he sighed, my voice thick with emotion. Truly, it's the job, he replied. But he will say, it is rare to see a case where the documentation is this clear truth against such bold arrogance. They really thought if they moved fast enough, Tolo wouldn't catch up. They were wrong. The letter summarizing this call is being quoted to them as we speak. You have the power now. The house is yours. The line went dead. He lowered the phone, looking at a black screen. He imagined the scene at the old house. The boxes half packed, not with sentimental items, but with things they thought they could pawn. Those champagne they might have bought to celebrate the Sally, now sitting warm and useless on the counter. The realization hitting Linda and Bob that they weren't just stopped. They were exposed. They had signed legal documents claiming ownership they didn't have. They had lied to a real estate agent, to a buyer, and to the government. The fear of the law is a potent thing. For years, they had operated on the fear of them, fear of their shouting, their guilt-tripping, their collective bullying. But today, a calm voice and a speakerphone had stripped all the power away. It wasn't just the grandson they could ignore anymore. It was the trustee. He was the one holding the deed. And for the first time since Grandpa George passed, he didn't feel like a victim of their greed. He felt like the guardian he intended me to be. He walked over to the closet and he pulled out my coat. He didn't need to rush over said Andy scream at them. He didn't need to engage in a shouting mess on the lawn. The title company had stopped the checks. The lawyer had drawn the line. The house was safe. Grandpa's estate was a fiction they had invented to rob the grave. The trust was the truth. And the truth had just dropped like a bomb in the middle of their living room. The silence in the lawyer's conference room was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and it tasted distinctly of ruin. Across the mahogany table, Mr. Sterling, a real estate investor my mother and the aunts had tried to swindle, looked less like a businessman and more like a predator who had just realized his prey was made of sawdust. He wasn't yelling. In fact, his voice was terrifyingly low, vibrating with a controlled rate that made the air conditioner's hum sound like a jet engine. Let me clarify this, Sterling sighed, sliding a thick stack of documents across the polished wood. You accepted a six-figure deposit from my firm for a property you do not own, do not have the title to, and illegally cannot sell. My mother, usually the picture of haughty indignation, had shrunk into her chair. Beside her, Aunt Carol and Aunt Linda looked like they were caught in the headlights of a semi-truck that had already crushed the brakes. They had played a game of confident bluffing, assuming that if they signed enough papers and bullied me hard enough, reality would bend to their will. They were wrong. It was a misunderstanding, and Carol squeaked, her voice cracking. We represent the family trust. The boy he's just holding it temporarily. We were going to transfer the title before closing. You represented yourselves as the current owners, Sterling's lawyer interjected, his tone sharp as a scalpel. That is fraud. That is theft by deception. And considering the amount of money involved, we are looking at felony charges. The word felony hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. He sat at the far end of the table, my own attorney, Mr. Henderson, beside me. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Grandpa George's will was ironclad, and the deed was in my name. He had simply refused to sign their transfer papers, and their house of cards had collapsed the moment Sterling and a final title check. We want our deposit back, Sterling sighed, leaning forward. Today, plus legal fees. If the wire transfer isn't initiated by close of business, I am walking straight to the district attorney's office. This was the moment the floor dropped out. I watched the blood drain from my mother's face. She looked at Linda, then at Carol. A horrific, silent communication passed between them, a realization that was almost audible in its intensity. We don't have it, my mother whispered. Sterling's eyes narrowed. Excuse me, we spent it, and Linda blurted out, tears beginning to stream down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. We thought the Sally was a sure thing. He paid off the lingering debts on the condo. Carol bought a new SUV. We booked a European tour. The arrogance was gone. The greed that had fueled their torment of me for the last 6 months had evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of consequences. They had spent the money before the ink was dry, treating the deposit like a luxury win rather than a contractual obligation. Mr. Henderson leaned over to me and he whispered, "This is where it ends." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Sterling was merciless. He didn't care about their vacations or their debts. He wanted his money, and he had the law firmly on his side. To avoid being handcuffed, Andy paraded out in front of the neighbors, My family had to liquidate their lives. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched from the porch of Grandpa George's house my house as their world was dismantled piece by piece. It was a slow-motion car crash of their own making. And Carol's brand new luxury SUV, the symbol of her premature victory, was sold at a loss back to the dealership. And Linda had to emergency list her vacation condo, accepting a lowball offer just to get the cash liquid in time. But it wasn't enough. The legal fees Sterling demanded were astronomical, punishment for the deception. My mother, who had always prided herself on her status and her meticulously curated image, suffered the greatest humiliation. She was forced to take out a predatory second mortgage on her own home and sell her jewelry family heirlooms she had hoarded away from her sisters to a pawnbroker for a fraction of their value. They were plunged into massive, crippling debt. The lifestyle they had flaunted, the superiority they had wielded like a weapon, was gone. They were technically free from prison, but they were prisoners of their own financial ruin. The final confrontation came on a rainy Tuesday. I was in the living room, packing up the last of Grandpa's old books to store them safely, when a banging on the door shattered the quiet. I opened it to find my mother and the aunt standing, sir, soaked and shivering. They looked aged, haggard, stripped of their veneer. When it did come in, my mother sighed. It wasn't a demand this time. It was a plea, though she tried to mask it with her usual tone. When it did tell about how you're going to fix this. I leaned against the door frame, blocking the entrance. Fix what? Start that, and Carol cried out, her voice hysterical. We are ruined, absolutely ruined. You have this house. It's worth a fortune. If you sell it now, you can pay off what Will Sterling and we can all start over. I stared at them, genuinely baffled by the depth of their delusion. Even now, after everything, they still viewed me as a resource to be harvested, and as a to be liquidated for their comfort. You committed fraud, I said calmly. You tried to sell my home out from under me. You spent money you didn't have. And now you want me to sell the only thing Grandpa left me to pay for your crimes. I am your mother, she screamed, stepping forward, her face twisting into the familiar mask of rage. You owe me, you ungrateful little wretch. You owe me everything. I owe you nothing, I replied. My voice didn't shake. My heart didn't race. For the first time in my life, I looked at her and saw like he was a stranger. Grandpa George knew this would happen. That's why he left the house to me, specifically. He wanted to secure my future. He knew that if you got your hands on it, you'd burn it to the ground for a quick payout. And he was right. You can't leave US like this, and Linda sobbed. We're family. Family doesn't steal from family. He sighed. Family does and try to have you thrown out on the street so they can go on a cruise. I stepped back and he placed my hand on the heavy oak door. I am keeping this house. I am keeping my inheritance. And I am done with all of you. If you close that door, my mother hissed, venom in every syllable, don't you ever come crawling back to US. That, I sighed, looking her dead in the eye, is a promise. I slammed the door. The sound echoed through the hallway, final and the absolute. I turned the deadbolt, the click sounding like the firing of a starting pistol. I walked back into the living room and I sat in Grandpa's old armchair. The rain lashed against the windows, but inside, it was warm and dry. The frantic energy, the yelling, the constant demands, it was all gone. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a home. They were outside in the rain, drowning in the depths of their own creation. I was in here, safe. Grandpa George's final wish had been fulfilled. He hadn't just given me a house. He had given me the means to break free. I closed my eyes and I listened to the silence, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been delivered.